Okay, okay. Well, I might ask about that then, Alan. What do we do about it? I mean, I guess when you're in Rome, you have to do as the Romans do. Is that what you're arguing in your book?
To some degree. It's obviously not black and white. The first thing we look at in our book is we create a model or identify a model for strategy involving China. And on the one hand, one kind of strategy for China involves companies that are primarily focused on accessing China as the factory of the world. So I want to do business in China because I can buy, my cheap couches or coffee pots or whatever that is. They become the factory of the world. So I'm interested in that's my focus for China. There are other Western companies that are focused on the Chinese market. So I want to be in China because I want to access corporate or individual customer accounts. And in many industries, China is the second largest market in the world. And in many industries, it's the biggest market in the world. So your approach to China depends in part on why you're there. Most companies in the West, there's over 1 million companies in the West doing business in and with China today. 1 million companies. Most of them are small, have a small, relatively inconsequential presence. They're basically buying an option. They're there. They don't really understand why they're there. They kind of are in the box checking business. Those companies are at risk. They're at risk. So number one is understand why you're there. Secondly is to think very carefully about the industry you're in, because China has targeted 10 industries where if you're a Westerner, you're going to be in deep, deep trouble if you don't think, 2 or 3 steps ahead of the Chinese. These are the industries we typically think of associated with the fourth industrial revolution, the kind of the industries of the future: robotics, pharmaceutical, aerospace, advanced materials. The Chinese have put a big umbrella up, and they keep readjusting the definition. But these are the industries most in the West would say, look, we'd really like to be there. In those industries, if you're a Western company competing in those industries, the Chinese have been clear about this. They have identified market share levels, hurdles, and they go from 70 to 80 to 90% domestic production, domestic market share in these industries. So if you're in aerospace, it's going to be about 80% of the industry must be controlled by Chinese enterprises, period. Doesn't matter how good your technology is, doesn't matter how good your service is. Your market share, it has been determined, will be reduced to at most that 20%, but you're going to have to cut that up and share it with other Western firms. So be very cognizant of what the Chinese are after. The Chinese are after 3 things. They've been very clear about this. It's been published. It's not, you don't have to be a spy and go in there and take pictures of their, secreted documents. Their strategy is based on 3 steps. Number 1, we want to become less dependent on the West. We want to reduce our dependency. Number 2, they want to dominate domestically. And number 3, they then want to go out into the world and lead the world to flip that dependency relationship so we in the West are dependent on China. That's their approach. And they've been doing this for 30 years, and they have articulated it since the early 2000s. And so in the West, we need to be very aware of what we're up against. That does not mean that China wants to decouple from the West. I think the worst thing that could happen to China is it would decouple from the West. And by the way, it would not be a good thing for the West to decouple from China. But they clearly have an engagement strategy and a strategy whose objective is to ultimately win and flip that dependency relationship.